Ningguang smiled. Of course. In fact, the research is nearly finished. Mizunashii Reina could hardly believe what she was hearing. The other journalists with her made similar sounds of disbelief. How long had it been since the Cocoon Game's launch? Not even a week. Was the Void Terminal already done? This had to be a joke, right? Seeing their shocked faces, Ningguang elaborated. It's not as sudden as it sounds. I've had the idea for the Void Terminal and started preparations a while ago. The Sindora Group's AI technology was used to further refine and upgrade the project, which made the terminal's functions much more complete. I see. Rena nodded, though she felt there was more beneath the surface than Ningguang was saying. She made a mental note to decide later whether to report this to the organization. Ningguang then added, Actually, we do have a small problem, and I'd like Miss Mizunashi's opinion, if that's all right. Ah, of course, Reina agreed without hesitation. She couldn't imagine it would be anything wildly technical. Ningguang wouldn't ask laypeople for that, but she knew their perspective might be useful. Don't be nervous. It's a very simple question. Ningguang smiled. Tell me, Miss Mizunashi, would you prefer the Void Terminal to be an earpiece or a watch? Rena blinked. She hadn't expected that. Ningguang explained, chuckling a little. Our engineers have completed most of the terminal's functions, but we haven't decided on the form factor. There are two proposals, a watch and an earpiece. Both have advantages and supporters, and I'm having trouble choosing, so I'd like your view. I see. Rena thought for a moment, then looked up. Personally, I think a watch would be better. It's convenient and doesn't obstruct your line of sight. She gave her reasons briefly, then asked which option Ningguang favored. I lean toward the earpiece, Ningguang admitted. To some extent, the terminal was conceived as an earpiece from the start. If possible, I wouldn't change that. But most of the R&D staff and many others prefer a watch, so it looks like the terminal will probably end up as a watch. A few more routine questions followed, and the interview wrapped up. As the Yomiuri television team left, Ningguang's assistant, Ganyu, accompanied them to the door. Miss Ganyu, do you have any hobbies? Reina asked as they walked. She wanted to keep the conversation going, build a rapport. As a CIA undercover operative embedded in the black organization, Rena was following orders. Investigate whether Ningguang's AI, Noah's Ark, still existed and how advanced their AI development had become. Gathering intelligence on politics, technology, companies, and important personnel was part of her remit. Although she was currently out of contact with the CIA, she still kept an eye out for useful information. Sindora Group's headquarters were in Country M, and Ningguang's recent projects could have a big impact there. It made sense to make friendly connections with people close to him. Rena already knew from her research that Ganyu was deeply trusted by Ningguang and handled many affairs on his behalf, second only to King, who was managing Sindora Group matters in Country M. Unlike King, who came off as forceful and cool, Ganyu seemed gentle and considerate. Starting with Ganyu would likely be easier than trying to get close to King. My hobby? Ganyu seemed to treat it as small talk. My hobby is work. Rena was momentarily speechless. Could someone genuinely call work a hobby? I meant, what do you like to do in your time off? On holidays? If you mean weekends or holidays, I'm probably still working, Ganyu said with a shy smile. If I stop before my work is done, I feel guilty. Besides, work is something I want to do. Doing it makes me happy. Rena couldn't help laughing. No wonder Miss Ganyu accomplished so much at such a young age. That's admirable. Oh no, I'm not that impressive. Miss Ningguang and Miss King are the remarkable ones. I just do what needs to be done. Ganyu waved her hands, modest and sincere. Seeing the hobby topic fizzle out, Rena quickly changed tack. Then what do you usually like to eat? Any favorite restaurants? If you have time, maybe we could go together. Well, Ganyu hesitated, a little embarrassed. I like eating flowers and vegetables. My taste might be a bit different from others. 104.2. New cooperation. Mizunashi Reina's expression was hard to read. If not for Ganyu's earnest face, she might have thought he suspected she'd approached him deliberately and was giving a casual, offhand answer. But his sincerity convinced her otherwise. So a person who only ate vegetables and flowers, loved their work, and was exceptionally competent really existed. Where had Miss Ningguang found such a useful subordinate? Even Jin would be envious if he knew. But speaking of favorite restaurants, there is one, Wanmin Restaurant, at 1039 Ban, 5 Chome, Bakatown. If you're free another day, Miss Mizunashi, I could take you there. Their vegetarian dishes are the best I've ever tasted, though everything else is good too. Ganyu recommended his favorite place with obvious pleasure. Finally, Ganyu said something Rana could follow up on. The two talked a little more, exchanged contact information, and agreed to go to Wanmin together when they had time. Soon the group arrived back at the company entrance. After goodbyes, Mizunashi Reina and the others returned to the TV station to organize the interview material for tomorrow's broadcast. In the car, while the other staff weren't watching, Rena sent the information she just gathered to Gin and asked if there was anything else to do. After waiting a while with no reply, she put her phone away and set the matter aside. On the other end, Jin read the email Kier had just sent, paused to think, and then forwarded a message to Cointreau. Not long after, Cointreau replied, "Understood. I'll ask him, Cointreau." Seeing that Cointreau had it under control, Jin left it at that. The cooperation with that Kea was Cointreau's responsibility. Unless necessary, Jin didn't intend to interfere. Jin already knew Ningguang had ties to Kea, likely they were part of the same Tevat organization. He had a general understanding of the silver bullet trade with Kea from back then, and knew what sort of skincare products Kea had developed with that information. Part of the earlier arrangement had been to help the organization establish a foothold in Country H, so the organization had also been involved with the skincare company Kea's family set up there. Naturally, Jin knew about the effects of that company's products. Now Ningguang, freshly arrived in Japan, had opened a branch selling products with similar effects, and Kea and his group had shown no sign of reacting. Gin didn't believe a man as sharp as Kea could have missed it. If there was no reaction, it could mean only one thing. Ningguang and Kea were on the same side. Whether they could cooperate would depend on the results of Cointreau's conversation with Kea. Cointreau, staring at Jin's message, sighed. Jin certainly knew how to find work for him. The trade had finally gotten on track. The next steps would mainly be handled by Irish and the ever-enthusiastic Bourbon. He'd originally planned to use this lull to find Xiaxi and talk with her. Since they parted at the Twilight Mansion, they hadn't met again. Over time, Cointreau felt the tone of Xiaxi's messages had become irritably sharp. If he didn't explain things in person soon, he worried the longer it dragged on, the harsher her reaction would be when they finally met. He'd been relieved when her attitude had improved a while back, so he'd not rushed to meet her, but now it seemed things had soured again. Were girls all so fickle? With this new matter, their meeting would have to be postponed once more. He thought he should keep more of the life potions Kea traded to the organization for himself, just in case, to avoid being unable to treat injuries after a run-in with his sister and raising suspicion among the organization. Cointreau was already planning for the hypothetical fallout of getting hurt when he saw Xiaxi. After some thought, he decided to contact Kea directly. He called, and they spoke about the issue at length. They reached agreement on most points, stalling only over a few details. Eventually, under Kaya's threat to tell Xiaxi, Cointreau reluctantly relented. After the call, he drafted an email to the boss outlining the new trade terms he'd arranged with Kaya and asking for approval. The boss replied not long after, approving the trade, but this time it wouldn't be led by Cointreau. The operation was handed over to the organization's second-in-command, Rum. Cointreau wasn't surprised. Given that old man's suspicious nature, it was unlikely he'd entrust such important work to Cointreau again. Since Jin wasn't suited for this sort of task, Rum was the logical choice, and it didn't bother Cointreau. As long as the trade moved forward, that was what mattered. Handing it to Rum might even be beneficial to him. If anything went wrong, the blame would fall on Rum, not Cointreau. He smiled at his own self-interest and forwarded the trade details and Ningguang's contact information to Rum. Rum would arrange personnel to contact Ningguang and the others to discuss specifics. With that set, Cointreau put the matter out of his mind. It wasn't until the next day that he remembered to tell Jin the final outcome. Jin read the message, a little incredulous. He'd already learned some details from Room, and Cointreau had only just remembered to inform him now. Beside him, Vodka noticed his brother's mood and asked, concerned, "Big brother, is something wrong?" "It's nothing." Gin didn't feel like explaining. He figured he'd find out soon enough, and for now he couldn't be bothered to go into it. 143. Hidden Dangers of Virtual Terminals. Gin didn't even bother replying to Cointreau's message. He simply texted Kir to tell her she was off the hook. Mizunashi Reina stared at the message she'd just received from Jin, puzzled. Given Jin's paranoia, she'd expected that even if she reported Noah's Ark had self-destructed, he wouldn't believe her. He'd probably order her to infiltrate and investigate further. And judging by the level of AI the Sindora group was showing and the projects they had in development, Rena didn't think the organization would let the matter drop easily. Had they assigned someone else to look into it? If so, why sideline her? Logically, she was the obvious choice now that she knew both Ningguang and Ganyu. Were they suspicious of her, or was there simply a better candidate? Since Jin had asked her to investigate Noah's Ark in the first place, she reasoned he probably didn't distrust her, so the latter seemed more likely. The more she thought, the more the organization felt bottomless. Their people were everywhere. Meanwhile, after watching Ningguang's interview on Yomiuri television, Conan looked troubled. He hadn't expected Ningguang to be so close to tangible results so soon after acquiring the Sindora group. She must have had her eye on them for a long time. Ran and Detective Mori were excitedly discussing the Void Terminal's functions, but Conan didn't join in. He suspected Ningguang's project had an ulterior motive. The Void Terminal was more than a handheld computer. Suddenly his phone vibrated. It was a text from Haibara asking him to come to Dr. Agasa's place. Something urgent to discuss. Ran, Nichan, Dr. Agasa says he's got a new game. I'm sleeping over at his place tonight. See you tomorrow. With that, he dashed out of the Mori Detective Agency. Huh. Conan, be careful on the road, and don't be late for school tomorrow, Ran called after him, catching only a glimpse of his retreating back. Honestly, it's a school day tomorrow and he's off to play games. I hope he doesn't stay up too late, she murmured, staring at the open door. Dr. Agasa's house. When Conan arrived, he found Dr. Agasa and immediately asked why Haibara had summoned him. Had something unexpected happened? Dr. Agasa looked equally clueless. He'd been watching Ningguang's interview with little Haibara, he said, and afterward, Haibara's expression had darkened. She'd sent the message to Conan. The details, he added, would have to come from her. So where is she? Conan pressed. He'd rushed over at her request. Why wasn't she here? Ahem, little Haibara's taking a bath, Dr. Agasa coughed, scratching his head in embarrassment. She didn't expect you'd get her so quickly, so... Conan stared. So it was his fault for arriving too fast? He had no choice but to sit on the sofa and wait for Haibara to finish. Fortunately, she emerged before long and Conan jumped up. Haibara, what's so urgent? Is it about the organization? She rolled her eyes. No. Conan's shoulders slumped. Couldn't the boy think about anything else? Oh, then what is it? His voice dropped in disappointment. It's about Ningguang's Void Terminal. Noting his immediate change in expression, Haibara rolled her eyes again and explained why she'd called him. Conan's interest revived at the mention of the device he'd been watching. Ignoring his reaction, she continued. Do you remember how Ningguang described the Void Terminal in the interview? Of course. Though he wasn't sure why she asked, Conan repeated what he'd heard. It's a portable device that integrates data collection, transmission, and communication, right? What's wrong with that? That's exactly the problem. Haibara sighed. Back when I was with the organization, one of their codenamed members paid close attention to network security, so I learned a bit. The organization always used isolated internal networks at their bases to prevent leaks. Once the Void Terminal hits the market, assuming it works as advertised, almost nobody will refuse such a convenient tool. If the majority of people start using it and it's compromised, all their data becomes transparent to Ningguang and her backers. She took a breath. Conan, you know they're connected to the Black Organization. We don't know how deep those ties run yet, but if my guess is right, it's bad news for us. Seeing Conan's expression darken, she added, Of course I could be overreacting. Others will surely inspect the device once it's released. Any obvious flaw would be exposed. and pulling something like this off is hard. Ordinary AI can't handle that much computation, and we still lack a stable method to transmit massive amounts of data in real time. Author's note, this part is fictional. Please overlook any technical inaccuracies. So the Void terminal might have privacy issues, but probably not on the scale I'm imagining. It depends on current tech and how ambitious Ningguang really is, she concluded. Conan's face remained serious, though less grim than before. He turned to Dr. Agasa, who had been listening quietly. The professor knew far more than Haibara about the technical side. Dr. Agasa, to pull off what Haibara just described, would it take something on the level of Noah's Ark? 144. Threatening letter. Dr. Agasa stroked his chin and thought for a moment before answering uncertainly. Theoretically, that's possible, but the computing power needed to actually run it would be much greater. I suspect you'd need the equivalent of 2 Noah's Arks to reach that level. So, Doctor, did Noah's Ark really self-destruct at the press conference? Conan pressed. Haibara's words had planted doubt in his mind. If Ningguang had ignored Kenmura's danger just to acquire the Sindora group, she wouldn't have let go of something as useful as Noah's Ark without taking precautions against self-destruction. Yes. Dr. Agasa's reply was firm. When Noah's Ark went off, he and the technicians had inspected the server room in the basement where the press conference was held. There was no residual code left inside. Noah's Ark had indeed self-destructed. Conan was a little surprised. Maybe the reason Miss Ningguang hadn't stopped it was that keeping the AI Noah's Ark would have caused even bigger problems. He remembered the reactions of certain economists and politicians at the scene, their uneasy expressions when they confirmed Noah's Ark had destroyed itself, and the idea made sense. Still, with Dr. Agasa's certainty, the tension Conan had been holding finally eased. Looks like things aren't as bad as you thought, Haibara. Has your persecution complex flared up again? Conan teased, relaxed now. Idiot, I'm talking about the worst-case scenario. Haibara scowled, annoyed at Conan's lack of seriousness. In short, I think Miss Ningguang is different from the Xiangling and Noelle you knew before. You should be more careful around her and the people she surrounds herself with. She might even have connections to the Black Organization, like that Kaya guy. If Xia Si had been there to hear Haibara, she'd have been impressed by Haibara's sixth sense. Ningguang really was about to become entangled with the Black Organization. And that Void terminal, if you use it, don't discuss anything related to the organization on it, Haibara added, then ignored Conan, said goodnight to Dr. Agasa, and went back to her room. Conan watched her leave with half-closed eyes. Lately, Haibara's temper seemed to have gotten worse. He'd only been joking. He had been taking her warning seriously. He even planned to find a chance to go to the Wanmin restaurant later and ask Noelle for more information about Ningguang. If Haibara knew that, she would probably be even angrier. She wanted him to be cautious, not to start snooping. Shinichi, I think Haibara's right. You should pay attention. I'm not saying Miss Ningguang definitely has ties to the Black Organization, but it's better to be careful. Dr. Agasa said hesitantly beside him. Yes, Conan answered helplessly. He didn't know why the doctor thought he was being flippant. He really was taking it seriously. A few days later at the Muri Detective Agency. So you want us to find who has been sending threatening letters to one of your newspaper reporters? Kogoro Mori sat on the sofa, trying to look serious as he questioned the client across from him. Yes, the man nodded. That's right. Then tell me exactly what happened. Kogoro picked up the teacup Ran had just brought him, took a sip, and waited. Ran had already served tea to Kogoro and the client, and stood by to listen. Conan, having heard there was a request, had long since hurried to his uncle's side to listen in. The client sipped his tea, set the cup down, produced a business card from his bag, and handed it over. Detective Mori, I'm Takeuchi Koichi, editor-in-chief of the Baika Daily. One of my reporters has received threatening letters for 3 days in a row, and the tone has been escalating. The latest, sent yesterday, even had a razor blade hidden inside. If Charlotte hadn't been careful, she could have been cut. Oh, right, Charlotte is the reporter who received the letters, Takeuchi added. Did you bring the 3 letters with you? Kogoro took the business card and glanced at it. Someone who sent letters repeatedly usually assumed nothing could be gleaned from them, but Kogoro, as a self-proclaimed great detective, liked to look for overlooked clues. I brought them. Here they are. Takuchi produced 3 identical white envelopes and handed them to Kogoro. The envelopes looked ordinary. All 3 had been opened. Kogoro took out the papers inside and spread them on the table. Ran and Conan leaned in to read with him. Each sheet was plain white paper with words cut from newspapers and glued on to form threatening messages. From left to right, the 3 notes read: 1. Mind your own pen. 2. Don't do anything extra anymore or face the consequences. This is just a warning. 3. If you don't stop, it won't be as simple as just getting hurt and bleeding. Rand's face went pale. How awful. Mr. Takuchi, you said the last one had a razor blade. Is Miss Charlotte all right? Yes, she's fine. When Charlotte opened the envelope, she noticed something was off and put on protective gloves before opening it, so she wasn't injured, Takuchi replied after a brief pause. 145. Threatening Letter 2. Remembering that moment still left Takuchi Koichi with a chill. The letter had been addressed to the newspaper office. Because Charlotte had been receiving threatening letters lately, Takuchi had arranged for all incoming mail to be screened first. Any envelopes without a clear return address or that looked suspicious were to be handed to him. He would open them and check the contents before giving them to Charlotte. This was why the letter ended up in his hands. He was about to open it when Charlotte came by for something and noticed something wrong. If she hadn't, Takuchi would have been the one injured. A razor blade isn't large, but it can do a lot of damage if someone's caught off guard. While Ran and Takuchi were talking and drawing Kogoro's attention, Conan slipped the envelope out of Takuchi's hand and examined it closely. Front and back, there was nothing to see. Whoever had sent the letter had been careful. That was odd. The text of the 3rd letter left no doubt the sender expected whoever opened the envelope to be cut by the blade. If the culprit was so cautious and determined to cause harm, how had Charlotte been able to tell there was something hidden inside at a glance? Editor-in-Chief Takuchi, Charlotte's amazing. She knew there was something hidden without even touching the envelope. How'd she do that? Can you teach me? Conan set the letter down and leaned toward Takuchi, pretending to be curious. Kiddo, that's the eye of a great reporter, Takuchi said, looking down at the child with pride. Seeing the hidden truth from appearances, that's an indispensable skill for Charlotte. You're still young. It takes talent and a lot of experience. When you finish elementary school, if you still want to learn, I'll ask Charlotte to teach you. Takuchi smiled and ruffled Conan's hair, clearly humoring him and hoping the kid would forget about it in time. Conan scowled inwardly at being treated like a child. Was that really the explanation for Charlotte's insight? Seeing the hidden truth from appearances sounded a little grand for a newspaper reporter, even for Charlotte. Kogoro didn't bother with Conan's interruption. This wasn't the first time, and if need be, he'd scold Conan later. By the way, he asked, suspicious, if these letters were sent to Miss Charlotte, why didn't she come herself? Why is the editor-in-chief commissioning a detective instead? Ran and Conan turned to Takuchi with the same question. Takuchi sighed and gave a wry smile, because Charlotte doesn't take it too seriously. Under Kogoro's curious gaze, Takuchi went on to explain. He couldn't blame Charlotte. Ever since she became a reporter, she'd been committed to putting the truth in print, and that had made her the target of attacks and threats more than once. She'd built up some self-defense skills, and previous threatening letters had never led to anything, so everyone got used to them. This is the first time threats came for 3 days in a row, and someone almost got hurt, he said. I told Charlotte to be more careful, but she didn't take it to heart. I'm worried, which is why I came to ask Detective Mori for help. You're so capable, Detective Mori. Surely you can find who sent these. Kogoro puffed up at the praise and laughed loudly. Don't worry, leave it to me, Great Detective Kogoro Mori. I'll catch the coward who sent those letters. Right, Takuchi agreed, bright-eyed. Conan rolled his eyes inwardly. The old man was very confident. No clues yet, and he's already making guarantees. If you have any other clues, bring them out, Kogoro added, extending his hand. Don't waste time. Takuchi blinked. Detective Mori, I've given you everything, just these 3 threatening letters. What, that's it? Kogoro said, incredulous. Oh, there's one more thing I forgot, Takeuchi said, and under Kogoro's expectant look, he produced a piece of wrapped cloth. Inside was an ordinary razor blade, the blade taken from the latest threatening letter. Kogoro curled his lip in disappointment. So, do you see anything, Detective Mori? Takeuchi asked, looking to him. Well, this, Kogoro stammered. Examining it, he could only see a common blade, nothing special, nothing that stood out. He was at a loss. Conan seized the moment. He'd already been leaning in and looking the blade over in Takeuchi's hand. It was unremarkable, but its style made it clear it had been removed from a utility knife. Those kinds of knives were common in offices and often used by students, teachers, or staff at universities. Of course, ordinary homes had them too, so it wasn't proof of anything by itself. Conan had also noticed the paper of the threatening letters was plain printer paper. That didn't seem like a coincidence. It suggested the sender had frequent access to a printer. Putting those two details together, the utility knife blade and standard printer paper, the likelihood that the sender worked in an environment where printing was routine went up. That made it more probable the culprit was connected to a company or a university, possibly someone in a position of responsibility. After all, an ordinary employee might make careless mistakes, but it would take someone with motive or authority to go so far as to threaten a reporter. 146. Another detective hearing. Conan's question. Takeuchi Koichi stared for a moment. It struck him as odd that a child would ask such things, but he answered seriously. None were delivered today. Actually, that's a little strange. Before, these letters usually arrived in the morning, but I haven't received any today. Could the sender have given up? Kogoro Mori guessed. Conan thought that unlikely. From Takeuchi's earlier words, he knew Charlotte wasn't intimidated by the threatening letters at all, so the sender's goal hadn't been met, and they wouldn't just stop. That's unlikely. Charlotte isn't going to abandon her investigation, so. Takeuchi Koichi's opinion matched Conan's. Then why wasn't there a letter today? Kogoro muttered. Had the sender simply forgotten? Conan offered another possibility. Could the culprit have delivered the letter directly to Miss Charlotte's apartment? Takeuchi's eyes widened. That's very possible. No, I've got to go find Charlotte right away. He stood up. Detective Mori, could you come with me? If the letter was delivered to Charlotte's place, I might need your help. Ah, of course, Kogoro agreed without much thought. It was his only case at the moment. Soon Takeuchi, Kogoro, Ran, Conan, and a couple of others stood in front of an apartment building in Haido Town. Kogoro glanced sideways at Ran. Honestly, Ran, why did you come? The client only called me, the great detective. Ran shot him a look. What does it matter? I'm worried about Miss Charlotte too, and if the sender doesn't just send letters anymore and decides to take action, I should be here to help protect everyone. Kogoro shifted his gaze down to the small boy at his side. Then why'd this brat come along? Conan flashed Uncle Mori a sugary smile. Maybe I can help. Kogoro rolled his eyes. He didn't take Conan seriously, but since they were already there, he might as well let them come. After a few hurried instructions to Ran and Conan, they followed Takeuchi to room 406 on the 4th floor. Takeuchi rang the bell. No answer. His nervousness showed. That's strange. It's a day off, and Charlotte usually works on her materials at home, Takeuchi said anxiously. Kogoro and the others felt a twinge of worry too. Finally, Kogoro suggested they break down the door. In his haste, Takeuchi agreed. The two exchanged a tense look and moved to charge. Editor-in-Chief, what are you doing? A woman's voice called out, stopping them just in time, though barely. Charlotte's shout was only a fraction too late. Kogoro and Takeuchi couldn't stop their momentum and slammed into the door. They managed to slow down enough to avoid major injury, but the impact was enough to leave them clutching their foreheads and a little dizzy. Ran rushed forward to steady her father, while Charlotte hurried to check on Takeuchi. Conan, the only one with nothing to do, began to inspect Charlotte more closely. She didn't match the cool, composed image Conan had expected for a bold, truth-seeking journalist. Her manner was lively, a bit flighty, hardly the steady hand that might compose withering exposés. Still, she clearly had resolve. Charlotte, where were you just now? Takeuchi asked once he had his breath back. While I was organizing my investigation materials, I heard someone suspicious at the door, Charlotte said. I opened it and saw a stranger trying to stuff a letter into my mailbox. When I surprised them, they dropped the letter, so I picked it up and chased after them. She pulled a white envelope from her bag. I grabbed it and started running in the direction they fled. Charlotte, how many times have I told you to be careful? Pay attention to your safety. Takuchi began lecturing before he even thought about the contents of the letter. You just chased after a suspicious person. What if something happened? Conan stepped forward, took the envelope from Charlotte, and began to inspect it. Charlotte, distracted by Takuchi's scolding, let him without objection. The envelope was sealed with glue and unopened. Conan slid it carefully and removed the letter inside. The paper and envelope matched the material of the 3 threatening letters Takuchi had brought to the detective agency. He unfolded the letter. In bold, red letters it read, "This is the last warning." The 3 exclamation points were a bloody-looking bright red that made Ran lean back in surprise. Before Conan could do anything, Charlotte reached out and steadied Ran as she startled, soothing her. Don't be afraid. It's not blood. It's just red ink. Conan brought the paper to his nose and sniffed. There was no metallic scent of blood. Charlotte had been right. Conan glanced at her curiously. How could she tell at a glance that it wasn't blood? The question stayed with him for the moment. Takuchi finally stopped lecturing and introduced the group. This is Detective Mori and his company. I asked them to look into the threatening letters. Charlotte forced a small, awkward smile. About that, I've actually hired a detective as well to handle this case. Ah? Takuchi's eyes widened in surprise. Editor-in-Chief, weren't you worrying about this all day yesterday? You even complained that I didn't care enough. I thought about it and felt you were right. It's not good to let things slide. So I asked a detective friend of mine for help, and that's how it happened, Charlotte explained, glancing around slightly embarrassed. She hadn't expected her own editor-in-chief to make the same decision she did, nor to run into him like this. Sure enough, when Kogoro Mori learned Charlotte had also enlisted a detective, his competitive streak flared. The appreciation he'd been feeling for Charlotte evaporated the moment a rival appeared. Conan. Heh. The old man was obviously just admiring her looks earlier. Unaware of Conan's muttered complaint, Kogoro shot Charlotte a slightly sour look and asked, Well then, what's your detective friend's name? I might know them. Maybe we could compare notes later. He wanted to see which detective thought they could steal his commission. Charlotte shrugged off the awkwardness and beamed at him. She didn't take Kogoro's tone personally. Instead, she looked at him with admiration. Actually, Detective Mori definitely knows her. She's mentioned you before. She said Detective Mori is nimble and a man of hidden depths. Charlotte began, relaying her friend's praise of Kogoro. A former sharpshooter at the police academy, apparently his marksmanship is even better than Furuyare's, though few people know that. Gifted with extraordinary stamina, she added, sounding impressed. She said he has an unmatched knack for solving cases. He's a great detective worthy of the title. I thought she was exaggerating before, but now that I see you in person, I think she might actually be understating it, Charlotte finished with a grin. Conan. He really hadn't expected anyone to praise Uncle Mori like that. Was Charlotte being sincere? Ranmori clearly loved to hear someone compliment her father. Even Kogoro, who'd been momentarily put out, relaxed and laughed. Ah, your detective friend has good taste. Yes, I, the great Kogoro Mori, do have quite the talents, he boasted, puffing up at the memory of his sleeping Kogoro reputation. Kogoro's mood greatly improved. By the way, Miss Charlotte, you still haven't told me your detective friend's name. Charlotte answered brightly. Her name is Natsume Natsuki, Detective Mori. You know her, right? Eh? Kogoro, Ran, and Conan all reacted at once. They hadn't expected Charlotte's detective friend to be Natsume Natsuki, also known as Shiashi. Conan, startled, found himself scrutinizing Charlotte for any sign of a vision, like the ones he associated with people who gave off that same unusual aura, Xiangling, Lisa. To his surprise, he couldn't see any vision on her. He even casually circled her to be sure, but there was nothing. Maybe Charlotte just happened to know Shiashi, like Nahida, he thought. Yes, Natsume Natsuki, she's Shiashi. Detective Mori should know her, right? Charlotte repeated. We do, but I didn't expect you to be friends with Shiashi, Charlotte, Ran said with a laugh. Baika is really small. It's funny how you keep bumping into people you know. Since we're both Shiashi's friends, Ran, you don't need to use honorifics. Call me Charlotte, she added. Ran hesitated a moment and then switched naturally. Okay. Charlotte, since you commissioned Shiashi, where is she now? Charlotte's tone turned casual. She's tailing the suspicious person who handed me that threatening letter. She says she'll follow him to see if he leads her to the mastermind. Eh. The four, Kogoro, Ran, Conan, and editor-in-chief Takuchi, all blurted out in surprise. I told you I was with Shiashi earlier, Charlotte added. When we spotted the suspicious man, we started after him. But Shiashi said she could handle this sort of thing alone, so I came back. Takuchi Koichi looked stunned, then worried. Charlotte, how can you let your friend go after him alone? Natsume's probably not that old. What if something happens while she's trailing him? As Takeuchi fussed, Kogoro reached over and patted him on the shoulder. Don't worry. If it's the Natsume Natsuki I know, the one you should be worried about is the suspicious person. Takeuchi didn't quite get what Kogoro meant. He glanced at Ran, Conan, and Charlotte, and saw them all nodding in agreement. Conan let out a resigned little sigh. With Shiashi's skills, he thought, she would be able to tail the suspect undetected and find any accomplices, or, if there were none, catch the culprit herself. It left little for him to do. About 10 minutes after they had settled in Charlotte's apartment, her phone rang. It was Shiashi. She had good news. The person who had sent the threatening letter had been caught. The person who sent the threatening letter did indeed have an accomplice. Shiashi had trailed the other party as they fled in a panic to an apartment, slipped inside, and overheard a conversation that confirmed there were no other collaborators. She found a way to subdue both of them. Her movements had been a little rough, and since Shiashi then began searching for evidence, the two suspects assumed she was there to commit a home invasion. They even threatened to call the police. Under Shiashi's persuasive coaxing, they quickly decided against it. When the police arrived after Shiashi's report, the two promptly surrendered and confessed. Kogoro Mori wasn't surprised to hear the culprits had been caught. He'd already expected it. He was a little disappointed he wouldn't get the full commission fee, but with the matter resolved, everyone was in good spirits. From the call Shiashi had just made, the group learned the full details of the threatening letter case from Charlotte. Conan's earlier suspicion had been right. One of the culprits was a leader at a high school, the mastermind behind the threatening letter. Charlotte had discovered during a previous interview at that school that he'd been taking kickbacks, manipulating scholarship quotas, and so on. Realizing Charlotte knew and was still investigating the students, he had sent the letter to intimidate her into stopping. The other culprit was his subordinate, the one who delivered the letter and helped him balance the school's books. Even with the culprits in custody, nobody rushed to leave. Ran wanted to stay at Charlotte's place a while longer to see Shashi. She hadn't seen her in a while, wanted to catch up with both Shashi and Charlotte. Conan and Kogoro felt uneasy about leaving Ran alone, so they stayed too. Takuchi Koichi, embarrassed to make a lonely exit, joined them as well. They were chatting when the front door opened and Shiashi walked into the living room. Conan noticed she used a key to enter, which meant Charlotte had given her one. How close were these two that Charlotte trusted Shiashi with her key? Conan couldn't help but wonder as Ran, Shiashi, and Charlotte immediately launched into an enthusiastic conversation. The three young women, with mutual friends and shared interests, fell into easy chatter. Kogoro and Takeuchi couldn't break into their talk, so they drank and chatted quietly together. Are there really celebrities living in this building? Ran asked, curious after Charlotte mentioned the residents in passing. Yeah, Charlotte said. Security here is good and privacy is respected, so it's popular with public figures. I've bumped into a few of them. Who? Ran pressed. There's Mina Mizuno, Jun Watanabe. Charlotte tapped her chin, thinking, oh, once I ran into Yoko Okino. Miss Yoko, the name set Kogoro off. He abandoned his conversation with Takeuchi and leaned eagerly toward Charlotte. You actually saw Miss Yoko here? That can't be. She doesn't live around here. Could she have moved? Kogoro demanded, practically vibrating with excitement. Charlotte used both hands to push his body back gently. Detective Mori, please calm down a bit. She might be here. How can I— Ah! Kogoro sputtered. Rand stepped forward with a grim expression and grabbed her father's collar, yanking him back to his seat. Kogoro's face flushed as she held him tight. He patted his chest and coughed as if he'd survived a disaster. Charlotte blinked and waved it off. No, it's fine. All right, Charlotte, you said you saw Miss Yoko? Rand asked, curiosity overriding annoyance. Kogoro immediately straightened up and pricked up his ears to hear Charlotte's answer. Conan rolled his eyes at the spectacle. Celebrity gossip didn't interest him and wandered around the living room, bored. Only Rand bothered to call after him, "Don't wander off," before returning to the conversation. Conan glanced around the room. There were camera parts here and there, stacks of newspapers on the floor, the sort of clutter you'd expect from a working reporter. He moved toward a shelf and took down a few photographs on display. Two were of Xiaxi and Charlotte together. One was a solo picture of Xiaxi. The other two showed Charlotte with different people. In one, Charlotte stood beside a sweet-looking woman with long brown hair in a blue-green modified kimono decorated with cherry blossoms. On her obi was a small glass bead, a vision. Conan leaned closer. The bead's color was green, the first time he'd ever seen that color, and its metal frame was unlike the ones he'd seen before. His earlier hunch was correct. Charlotte had connections to people who possessed visions. He examined the last photo more carefully. In it, beside Charlotte, posed an elegant, poised beauty with long, curly blonde hair and a large black top hat. She wore a white and black tube-top mini dress, a helm-shaped ornament at her waist, and yellow bows on her sleeves. A familiar glass bead hung from her left arm. Its color was yellow, the same as Noelle's, but the frame matched the style Conan had seen on Linny and Lynette's visions. He frowned, thinking about what the color and frame of a vision might signify. 149. Unknown surveillance. Despite everything, Xiaxi and Charlotte genuinely hit it off. As Conan studied Charlotte's photograph, Rand Mori, sitting across the living room, suddenly understood why Yoko Okino had come by. Charlotte explained that the idol had been visiting her friend, newscaster Mizunashi Reina. That makes sense, Charlotte said with a smile. I only just found out that Miss Mizunashi, the Yomiuri television anchor, lives in this building too, right below me. Rand brightened. What a coincidence, Xiaxi nodded. Charlotte told me she bumped into Miss Mizunashi when she went to interview Ningguang. They keep running into each other. Seems like fate, Rand laughed. Oh, maybe Charlotte can score Yoko's autograph through Miss Mizunashi from now on. An autograph from Miss Yoko? Kogoro Mori murmured, swallowing the words he'd been about to blurt out. He wanted one too. He shot a quick, greedy look at the ceiling. If he could cozy up to Miss Mizunashi, it might lead to Yoko. Takuchi Koichi, sitting beside him, noticed Kogoro's attention wandering and wisely fell quiet, letting the detective eavesdrop undisturbed. Before long, even Takuchi found himself pulled into the gossip. Celebrity talk was hard to resist. Conan, overhearing the name Ningguang, hurried back into the room only to be disappointed. The conversation kept circling back to Mizunashi Reina. As he tried to steer them toward the case, Charlotte mentioned something odd she'd noticed recently, and Conan's ears pricked up. What? Miss Yoko's in trouble? Kogoro leaped up and crowded Charlotte at the hint of danger, but this time Rand's sharp glare stopped him, and he forced himself to sound merely urgent. No, not Miss Yoko, Charlotte said quickly. It's Miss Mizunashi who's been having problems. I overheard something. Miss Yoko's probably just worried, which is why she's visiting more often. Problems? What kind? Rand frowned. Well, could it be connected to those people watching us from the building opposite? Xiaxi asked tentatively. On her way in, she'd felt furtive stares from across the street. At first, she'd assumed they were the same blackmailers who had sent Charlotte threats, but those culprits were already caught. That meant the surveillance had to be aimed at someone else. Hearing that Mizunashi might also be troubled, Xiaxi wondered if the two things were related. Surveillance? Someone spying on us? Editor-in-Chief Takuchi blurted out, surprisingly shaken. Up until now, he'd been quiet. If there were watchers as well as threatening letters, security had clearly been breached. How did a stalker get in? Security's supposed to be strict. First the letters, now this. It isn't safe. Charlotte, you should move, Takuchi worried aloud. Charlotte hurried to reassure him. No need. The Watcher probably isn't after me, and if anyone was foolish enough to try anything, they'd have to get past me first. Relax. After a lot of persuading, Takuchi let the idea drop and the group relaxed. Conan wiped away an imaginary bead of sweat. The editor's panicked chatter still nagged at him. The question remained. Someone across the street was watching, but who was the real target? Rand spoke up. Why don't we just ask Miss Mizunashi? If she's being watched, she might know why. If not, we can still help with whatever's bothering her. Brilliant. A friend of Miss Yoko is a friend of the great detective Muri Kogoro. Time for me to act, Kogoro declared, picturing the favor he could earn with Yoko. Solve her problem, and she'll put in a good word with Yoko, and Yoko will admire me even more. Heh. No one objected. The plan was set. They'd go downstairs and talk to Mizunashi Reina. One floor below, Reina rubbed her temples at the news she'd just received. She hadn't expected her younger brother to trace her current alias to Japan and to the television station. That complicated everything. Still undercover within the black organization, she couldn't meet Isuke without risking exposure, but if she let him keep digging, it might draw the organization's attention, and that would be fatal for both of them. She'd also noticed signs of surveillance lately, likely the FBI sniffing around her connections to the black organization. She had to keep Isuke safe. She stared down at the newspaper lying on her table. The headline praised the sleeping great detective, Muri Kogoro. She let the words sink in and fell into thought. The chime at the entrance snapped Mizunashi Rena out of her reverie. She glanced toward the door, alert. Who would be visiting at this hour? She had few friends, and it wasn't the usual time for Yoko Okino to drop by. Padded across the room, she peered through the peephole and froze. The face at the door was the very person she'd just been reading about in the paper. After a beat, she opened the door. Kogoro Mori was standing there, and behind him clustered several others. Miss Mizunashi, hello? Me again? Charlotte said as she popped her head out from behind Kogoro with a smile. Charlotte, and Detective Mori, what brings you all here? Rina asked, bewildered. Once everyone introduced themselves, Kogoro, acting as spokesman, explained why they had come. When he mentioned someone watching from across the street, Rina felt her heart tighten. She hadn't expected anyone else to notice those agents, federal agents out there. Had the FBI been this sloppy? A civilian had spotted them. Or was Kogoro that perceptive? Either way, Kogoro's presence was a plus. If she put Isuke under the detective's protection, it would reassure him. Still, Rina kept her face neutral. She wouldn't tell the detectives that she herself was the FBI's real target. That would blow her cover. I've been troubled lately, but not by surveillance, she said. If you hadn't mentioned it, detective, I wouldn't have known someone suspicious was watching. My real problem is my doorbell. She told them about the strange incident that had been bothering her. So someone's been ringing and running for 2 months? Kogoro said as he lifted the cup of coffee she'd just made for him. Yes, every Saturday at about 6:30 the bell rings. Even when I open the door right away, no one's there, she said, clearly worried. Ring and run, huh? Charlotte, ever the reporter, was already taking notes. Are you sure? Could someone really get away that fast? I don't know. The interval between the chime and me opening the door is very short. Probably not enough time for anyone to escape, Rena replied hesitantly. Then let's test it, Conan said, innocent as ever. We'll know whether anyone could get away in time. They had no better idea, so they agreed to try. Back at the entrance, Kogoro pressed the bell on purpose. The door swung unexpectedly, and Kogoro ended up with a bruise on his shoulder when it hit him, but the experiment showed it. An ordinary person couldn't have vanished that quickly. That only made the mystery stranger. Conan studied the corridor outside Rena's apartment, trying to figure out how the ringer had disappeared. His gaze drifted toward Xiaxi. Could the culprit move as fast as Sister Xiaxi and slip away in seconds? Xiaxi felt Conan's look and thought about what she'd been doing lately, brokering Ningguang's second deal with the black organization, keeping a low profile, barely showing herself. Rena, codenamed Kier, was a member of that syndicate, but Xiaxi had never contacted her. Aside from Charlotte's one previous meeting, no one from Tevat had ties to Rena. At first, Shiashi had assumed the surveillance was about Charlotte, but after witnessing the ringer and seeing Rena in person, it dawned on her. The agents outside were watching a known black organization operative. She couldn't recall every detail of the earlier case, but she did remember that when Rena first appeared in the storyline, the FBI had already suspected her of syndicate links. So those agents must be federal. Their skills, she thought, were disappointing. She had spotted them the instant she arrived. Charlotte had probably noticed even earlier. When Conan finally broke eye contact and frowned toward the building opposite, She knew he'd seen the Watchers too. Even a child, no, a high schooler, could pick them out. Conan already knew surveillance existed, but that didn't excuse the agent's sloppiness. No wonder she had first taken him for some low-level thug following Charlotte. "Miss Mizunashi, you have a lot of locks on this door," Kogoro observed as they stepped back inside. He'd noticed the extra bolts, far more than on Charlotte's door. "You're right, 4 of them," Ran added, leaning in to look. Rena gave a wry smile. "A single woman living alone can't be too careful." "Exactly, Charlotte," Takeuchi Koichi snapped before his reporter could reply. "You should take the same precautions. Stop brushing off security for the sake of a story. After that threat letter, lie low for a while, cover safer topics, or just move," he went on. "With Watchers outside and Miss Mizunashi being harassed, this place feels risky." Charlotte said nothing. Her editor was already lecturing her again. 151. Takagi. Miwako Charlotte had once again worked hard to talk him out of the idea. Mizunashi Rena waited until the conversation between Charlotte and editor-in-chief Takeuchi paused before asking curiously, "Has Miss Charlotte run into any problems recently?" Takeuchi Koichi didn't think much of it and briefly explained the recent threatening letter incident. "I didn't expect Miss Shiashi to be such a capable detective," he added. Mizunashi Rena finally turned her attention to Shiashi. At first glance, Shiashi had seemed only beautiful and gentle. Rena had assumed she was just a friend of Ranmuri and Charlotte. Hearing Takeuchi's words, though, she began to realize Shiashi was an accomplished detective. You really can't judge a book by its cover. Although Shiashi had solved some cases and gained a bit of a reputation, a certain person's influence meant few people connected those cases with her. Naturally, Mizunashi Rena didn't yet know how formidable Shiashi was. Still, she listened with interest, her main focus remaining on the famous detective Kogoro Muri. While the others chatted, Conan had already slipped away and run back to the apartment door, using chewing gum to stick an eavesdropping device outside. The Tuesday after the October holidays ended, the doorbell rang again. This time an unknown bottle of medicine was left at the door. "I had a doctor friend check it. He said it was sleeping pills," Mizunashi Rena said with an uneasy expression. The mention of sleeping pills made everyone think of a stalker. "So it really is a stalker then," Kogoro Muri guessed. Hearing that, Takeuchi looked at Charlotte. She avoided his gaze, and he could tell she still had no intention of moving. He couldn't force her, so he decided he would quietly keep a closer eye on her and visit whenever he could. "Miss Mizunashi, besides the sleeping pills, did anything else unusual happen?" Charlotte asked, still thinking about the doorbell incident. Rena paused, then looked up in surprise. "The night before last, Tuesday, I thought I heard someone in the apartment next door, which should have been empty." "In that case, it's very likely the stalker has a key to the next place," Kogoro speculated seriously. "That would explain how they vanished right after ringing the bell." To test the theory, the group went next door and found the door locked. If they could get inside now, they might find clues about the stalker. Suddenly, a strange sound came from the lock, as if someone were opening it from the inside. The group stepped back in shock. "Miss Mizunashi, are you sure no one's living next door?" Kogoro asked, staring warily at the door. "Yes, I'm sure," Rena replied, equally surprised. Under everyone's astonished eyes, the door opened, and a person they hadn't expected stepped out. "Shiashi, Sister Shiashi, it's you!" Ran and Conan cried out together. "Yeah, Shiashi, how are you the one coming out of there?" Kogoro demanded. Shiashi smiled for a moment at their startled faces, then quickly suppressed it and shrugged. "I guessed you wouldn't be able to open this door, so I climbed from our balcony to theirs and found a way in to open it for you." Silence. Kogoro was quiet a beat longer, then said, "Shiashi, In the future, please give us a heads up before you do something like that. At least then, they could be mentally prepared. He didn't want to be constantly startled by Xiaxi's surprises. Conan wasn't too surprised. When he saw the locked door, he'd planned to climb over from the balcony himself, but Xiaxi had been faster and more decisive. Conan watched as Charlotte secretly gave Xiaxi a thumbs up in approval. No wonder they were such good friends. They went into the neighboring apartment and found traces that someone had indeed been there recently. On the balcony glass, someone had written 3 characters. Kogoro mumbled them aloud. Kimiwa. What does that mean? He asked. Takagi. Miwako? Xiaxi sounded unsure. Seeing the characters for Miwa, she immediately thought of Miwako. With Ki before it, she connected it to Officer Takagi, who was known to like Officer Sato. The idea of Takagi's name paired with Miwako made her smile inwardly. I didn't expect Officer Takagi to look so honest, but be so bold in his private thoughts, she teased. Conan stared at the 3 characters with a twitching mouth. Heh, he said. If Takagi and Miwako, if he and Ran, ended up married someday, would Ran be called Kudo? Ran? Conan's snickering revealed the thought. Xiaxi thought his grin was a bit lewd, and without thinking much, pressed her hand to his head and rubbed vigorously, shoving him out of his train of thought. They phoned Officer Takagi and confirmed that he had been staying next door a few days earlier, and that the characters on the glass really did read Takagi Miwako. Over the phone, Takagi's ashamed, uncomfortable shouting made it clear he'd rather not have anyone else know. Conan decisively hung up. That kid Takagi is something else, thinking about that kind of nonsense during work hours, Kogoro said disdainfully. It's not a big deal, Xiaxi replied with a teasing look at Ran. A beautiful romance is always something to look forward to, right, Ran? Yeah, Ran stammered, blushing and quickly changing the subject. It's better than a certain someone who doesn't even pay attention to his own wife. It seems this has nothing to do with Miss Mizunashi's stalker. The trail has gone cold. Charlotte sounded a little disappointed, but before anyone could console her, she brightened on a whim. Still, I didn't expect this to include the lovely romance between those 2 officers. I must document this. If they ever get married, it will make a perfect keepsake. Before Editor-in-Chief Takuchi could stop her, and to the shock of everyone watching, she tugged her skirt up slightly, reached into a small white bag strapped to her thigh, and snapped a photo of the 3 figures reflected in the glass. Her skirt conveniently covered the leg bag, which was also why Conan hadn't noticed the vision earlier. Xiaxi, you know these 2 officers, right? When they get married, I'll give this photo to you to pass along to them. All right, Xiaxi answered calmly, unfazed by Charlotte's abrupt move. She didn't think it was anything to make a fuss about, though I think you'll be waiting quite a while before you can give that present. Editor-in-Chief Takuchi pinched the bridge of his nose as if nursing a headache. Charlotte, I told you not to lift your skirt so casually, and why are you strapping a camera to your thigh again? Why would I hide a camera on my leg? Kogoro Mori echoed, baffled. Charlotte's movement had been so fast he barely reacted, but fortunately he managed to look away in time. It's for concealment. Sometimes I need to hide my identity to shoot in certain places, so I pick an inconspicuous spot for the camera. You'll get used to it. Charlotte said then, seeing Takuchi still worried, added brightly, Don't worry, I have safety shorts on underneath. Nothing will be exposed. That's not what I'm worried about. Never mind. Takuchi opened his mouth to say more, but seeing Charlotte's blissfully innocent expression, he gave up. Kogoro glanced back sheepishly and found Conan staring intently at Charlotte's leg. He couldn't resist. He swung and punched him. You brat, don't you know better than to look at things you shouldn't? What are you staring at such a young age? Ow, that hurts! Conan yelped. He'd been watching the spot where the camera was strapped, thinking, when Kogoro's hand caught him by surprise. With Ran and Xiaxi giving disapproving looks, he hurried to explain. It's not what you think. I just thought Sister Charlotte's camera bag looked nice, that's all. He really had been staring at the camera bag. When Charlotte pulled the camera out, Conan had tried to avert his eyes, but had been one step too slow and glimpsed the bag. Though Charlotte moved quickly, and he only saw it for a moment, he noticed the decorative bead on the bag. It was a vision, and ice blue, exactly the same color as Mr. Kaya's. He hadn't clearly seen the frame in the rush, but that single detail was enough. His initial suspicion was right. Charlotte had a vision and was connected to that mysterious organization. Shiasi, too, seemed closely involved. It had better be, Kogoro said, curling his lip at Conan. After that awkward interlude, they returned to the case. Tomorrow's the Saturday in question, someone reminded them. Back at home, Mizunaishi Rena sat on the sofa, chin in hand, thinking. Kogoro sighed. It looks like the only thing we can do is wait until tomorrow morning and catch whoever rings the bell in the act, just like Shiashi did before. Suddenly determined, Kogoro stood and made a show of promising Mizunaishi, "Please let us stay here tonight. I, Kogoro Muri, will catch that trespasser for you, Miss Mizunaishi." The others exchanged glances on the sofa, then Mizunaishi Reina agreed. She let the three of them, Kogoro and the others, stay the night. Shishi went upstairs to rest in Charlotte's apartment. Takuchi Koichi, seeing that the threatening letter incident appeared resolved, and Charlotte was probably safe for now, had to return to work at the paper and left first. Conan would have liked to stay at Charlotte's. Investigating an associate with a vision was a rare chance, but the case came first, so he reluctantly gave it up. That night in Charlotte's apartment, Charlotte yawned and stretched. What a day. It's finally over for now. All that's left is to catch that culprit tomorrow. Traveler, let's wake up early and go downstairs together to see who dares ring the bell of an undercover organization and hasn't been caught yet. Sure, Shiashi replied, drying her hair after a shower. Seeing Charlotte preparing for a wash, she checked the time on her phone and decided she should inform a certain missing person about today's developments. With Kier expected to appear in the plot later and even supposed to carry out an assassination, and with Conan's interruption and the FBI now monitoring Kier, Shiashi wasn't sure whether the organization knew everything. It would be better to tell her brother what had happened so he could be ready. She really was a considerate little sister. Meanwhile, at a simulation training ground used by the Black Organization, two members, Korn and Chianti, were doing sniper drills with the simulation gear. They started at 500 yards and increased the distance in 50-yard increments, competing to see who could hit the farthest target. Partway through, Gin and Vodka entered the ground and joined Cointreau, who had arrived earlier. "Since when do you care about other people's sniper scores?" Gin asked, frowning. "And why have you been using disguises so much lately?" "It's nothing," Cointreau answered calmly. "It's only sensible to keep an eye on our members' abilities now and then. If we ever operate together, I need to know what to expect. As for the disguises," he looked toward the training lanes, "it's just practical work, blending in and observing. Sometimes a face needs to go unnoticed, so plans stay clean." Jin gave a short, skeptical hum but walked on, leaving the shooters to their competition. "It's nothing. I just need to check on the abilities of our members from time to time. If we ever have to act together, I want to know what everyone can do. As for this disguise..." Cointreau touched his face and smiled lightly. "I used this face the last time I met that FBI agent, Shuichi Akai. I have a feeling we'll meet again, so I changed my appearance so he won't recognize the wrong person." The practical reason was simple. Fewer people in the organization seeing his true face was better. Those who had already seen him were few, and he had ways to keep them quiet. Still, he preferred to avoid it when possible. He had sacrificed so much for his sister Shiashi that he couldn't even show his own face. He only hoped she would be merciful if she ever saw him again. Humph, Jin made a cold sound. He thought Cointreau's explanation was perfunctory and didn't believe it. Cointreau wouldn't change himself for unimportant reasons. Jin didn't press it. As long as Cointreau knew what he was doing, that was enough. Below them, Korn and Chianti's sniping range had already been pushed to 600 yards. Korn was trying 650, but he missed, the bullet grazing beside the target. Chianti followed with the same target and missed as well. It seems Korn and Chianti can only manage 600 yards. They can't compare to an undercover agent, Cointreau said, shaking his head with mild disappointment. This, he thought, was the current standard of elite snipers in the organization, worrying for its future. "You haven't touched a sniper rifle in a long time, have you? Since we're free today, Why don't we have a competition? Jin ignored Cointro's jab. It was true Korn and Chianti were mediocre, but Jin was more interested in measuring Cointro's sniping after a long absence. Huh? Forget it. I'm better at close quarters than sniping, Cointro replied with slight surprise. I only learned sniping a few years ago, he added, not very interested and ready to decline. If you agree to the match, I'll owe you a favor, Jin said. He didn't mind promising a favor. He was curious whether Cointro's sniping had regressed or improved. Jin had a feeling Cointro was planning something, but it was only a hunch. With Cointro's ability, if he wanted to hide his plans, it would be hard to find clues. Still, Jin was certain that if Cointro did intend to do something significant within the organization, he couldn't be bypassed. Whether Jin chose to be on his side could be crucial. After Jin's visit to the Twilight Mansion and the ensuing phone call, he had been 50 or 60% sure of his guess. If Cointro accepted this condition, that certainty would jump to 90%. He always left a margin, never speaking in absolutes, so 10% remained. Jin's offer was a probe, and he knew Cointro knew it. He watched the man calmly, waiting. Vodka, standing behind Jin, felt the tension between his elder and Cointro and kept silent. All right, I agree, Cointro said, breaking the stiff moment and letting Vodka relax. They took the positions Korn and Chianti had vacated. Chianti had been annoyed that her practice was interrupted, but when she saw Jin stepping up, she stopped complaining and moved aside to watch. She hadn't recognized the man next to Jin and leaned toward Vodka to whisper, "Vodka, who is that?" "He's Cointro," Vodka answered quietly. From the earlier exchange, it seemed Cointro would keep this face for now. Jin hadn't ordered secrecy, so telling Chianti and Korn the code name did no harm. "So he's Cointro. He looks so young," Chianti said in disbelief. This former person in charge of Europe looked hardly old enough. Korn, who had heard the answer, showed surprise too. Jin and Cointro checked their rifles, took their stances, and prepared. "Let's start at 700 yards to save time," Cointro said, his usual smile gone, his expression focused. Jin said nothing but nodded. "He's a bit arrogant. Starting at 700, Chianti muttered, frowning. That was beyond her own limit, and she hoped he wouldn't miss the first shot. But since he insisted, he must be confident. Cointro picked his first target and fired without much hesitation. Jin followed, also 700 yards, and hit the bullseye cleanly. Then they went to 750, 800, 850, all the way to 1,000 yards. To the astonishment and admiration of everyone watching, Jin and Cointro took turns and never missed a shot. Targets fell one after another with precision. Chianti couldn't help but sigh. As expected of Cointro, never judge a person by appearance. Anyone who dared to compete with Jin was no ordinary shooter. Korn stared at Cointro with new respect. Besides Jin, there was at least one other member whose sniping could rival Rai, the traitor. Korn wondered whether Cointro might even be more formidable than Rai had been. 154. Tomorrow's task. The sniping distance was now 1,000 yards. Cointro fired first and, unsurprisingly, hit the target. Next was Jin. He steadied his breathing, found the target in the scope, and squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out, but the target didn't fall. Jin's bullet skimmed past and struck the back of the target's chair. "Looks like you won. Shall we continue?" someone commented. Jin frowned, annoyed at the miss but not crushed by it. He reholstered his rifle, stood, and glanced at the man beside him with a raised eyebrow. "Let's keep going. It's rare we get time here. Might as well see if I've slipped." Cointro stayed where he was, preparing for the next round. Distances climbed 150, 1,100, 150, up to 1,300 yards. Cointro's aiming took longer as the shots grew harder, but he hadn't missed. At 1,350 yards, the training ground simulated a street. The target moved at varying speeds, was intermittently obscured by other cars and pedestrians. The difficulty spiked. Cointro gripped his sniper rifle, expression calm, tracing the target's silhouette in the scope. Just as he was about to fire, his gaze flicked. He ever so slightly angled the muzzle, and the shot went wide, by a hair. "What a shame. Just a little off," Chianti murmured, regret and surprise mixed in her voice. She hadn't expected Cointro to be that good, too good even, compared to Jin. Seeing Jin's earlier miss, she couldn't help feeling a small thrill at the outcome. Korn cleared his throat loudly, intruding between Vodka and the others so Vodka couldn't see Chianti's expression. "So," he said, "Cointro's sniping is pretty solid. Will he be the sniper on future missions?" "No way," Vodka blurted. "There are so few chances to shoot. Are we letting someone else take them now?" Korn's remark made Chianti uneasy. Chances to fire were scarce. She didn't want more competition, especially not from someone with Cointro's skills and standing. The thought dampened her mood. "Probably not," Vodka added. "From what Big Brother said, Cointro's actually better at close-quarters fighting than long-range sniping." Vodka hadn't noticed Chianti's inward reaction. Given what he'd heard from his brother and his own impressions of Cointro, Vodka really didn't see Cointro as a sniper by trade. Chianti's curiosity shifted. "So between Jin and Cointro, who's stronger?" she asked. Korn glanced at Vodka too, interested. Vodka hesitated, unsure how to answer. Later, off to the side of the range, Jin studied Cointro's result and narrowed his eyes. "Cointro, have you lost your touch?" he asked, tone unreadable. Cointro only smiled. "I suppose I'm a bit rusty after not using a sniper rifle for a while." Jin sneered, withholding judgment. Then Cointro's phone buzzed. He checked the message, and his smile softened into something more genuine. After reading, he pocketed the phone, thought for a moment, and asked, "Do you have an operation tomorrow? Is it related to Kier?" Jin glanced at him. "Yes, Kier will be needed, using her public identity." Jin didn't press why Cointro knew about the mission, but he did frown. "You've been picking up a lot of information lately." "Don't worry, I know what I'm doing," Cointro replied coolly. Jin's expression didn't change. "Why are you asking? Planning to join?" Cointro surprised him with a simple answer. "Yeah, count me in." Jin frowned. "Why?" "The FBI's been watching Kier's public identity. That could complicate things," Cointro said. "I won't interfere with the operation. I'll just be there as a safeguard." Jin didn't object out loud, though the FBI's involvement made him tense. Cointro explained what he'd learned from Siashi. She'd discovered today that the FBI had been monitoring Mizunaishi Reina, Kier's public persona, and, with help from Nahida and Noah's Ark, traced the surveillance back to Ms. Jody. That was the immediate reason for the scrutiny. If nothing unusual happened, the FBI would probably drop it. But it was a risk. "So Kier's still taking part tomorrow?" Cointro asked with a small smile. "Of course," Jin replied coldly. "If Kier can't shake the FBI or gets caught with leverage against her, then she's useless." "I'll be careful tomorrow," Cointro said. With that, Jin turned and walked away. Vodka watched his eldest brother, Jin, walk away, suddenly at a loss for how to answer Chianti's question. He wiped the cold sweat from his forehead, slipped past Chianti and Korn, and hurried after Jin. "Chianti, Korn, move, we've got a job." Chianti and Korn had been grumbling that they hadn't yet squeezed an answer out of Vodka when Jin's voice announced a mission. At the mention of work, both of them brightened and instantly forgot the question they'd been denied. The next morning, at 6:30, Shiashi and Charlotte were up early, curious to see who had been ringing Mizunaishi Reina's doorbell. They tiptoed downstairs and, at exactly 6:30, reached the corridor outside Reina's apartment to find Kogoro Mori opening the front door. "Good morning, Mr. Mori, Ran, Conan, and Miss Mizunaishi," Shiashi said with a smile. Shiashi noticed that the area in front of Reina's door looked different. 2 stacks of old newspapers were stacked there, and behind them, a child. That had to be the one who rang Reina's bell every Saturday. Conan caught Shiashi and Charlotte staring and realized they had also worked out the culprit. At Conan's cue, Kogoro pulled a little boy out from behind the newspapers. From the boy's trembling explanation, everyone learned why he'd been doing it. Reina reminded him of his mother, who had recently died, so he came every Saturday to ring her bell and wake her. He'd left sleeping pills intended to help her sleep. Listening to the child's teary, halting words, Reina's face softened. She knelt, gently took his shoulders, and comforted him. Conan felt a pang in his chest watching the scene. From the corner of his eye, he noticed Charlotte acting oddly. She had quietly lifted her skirt, slipped out a camera, and taken a photo of Reina consoling the boy. Conan thought, Charlotte really is a dedicated reporter. After Reina spoke, the boy nodded, rubbed his eyes with his sleeve, managed a small smile, and waved. "Bye, big sister." "Goodbye," Reina answered, watching him go with a gentle gaze. Don't be too sad, Miss Rena. For that child, moving on is best, Charlotte said, raising her camera. I took photos. If you'd like, I'll print them all for you as keepsakes. Thank you. Rena had noticed Charlotte's movements while comforting the boy and didn't mind. The child reminded her of her little brother, so she accepted the offer. With the doorbell mystery solved, Rena insisted on paying Kogoro and finally got his email address. The group said their goodbyes. Sis Yashi, Sis Charlotte, what are you going to do now? Conan asked in his high, childlike voice. We're going to check the building across the street, Charlotte replied, linking arms with Shiashi. You're going to find whoever's watching from over there, right? Ran guessed. I live here and don't plan to move, so I need to know who's keeping tabs on me, Charlotte explained. Now that they knew someone was watching, neither Shiashi nor Charlotte was willing to ignore it. Shiashi was Charlotte's friend. Helping was only natural. Anything less would look suspicious. Ran looked worried. Will it be dangerous? Do you need help? No worries. Charlotte waved a hand while tugging Shiashi forward. Even if you don't trust me, trust Shiashi's combat skills. With her around, there's no danger. True, Ran conceded. Then I'm coming too. Conan was curious about the Watcher and his motives. He'd been planning to investigate later, and now he could tag along with Shiashi and Charlotte, maybe learn something about Charlotte as well. No, Conan, they're investigating. Don't cause trouble, Ran warned. But I want to go with Sis Shiashi. I can help. Conan whined like a toddler. Fine, let him come. He's smart. Maybe he'll be useful, Shiashi said. She knew he would follow anyway. Better to agree than have him sneak after them. Besides, hearing a high schooler whine like a toddler gave her goosebumps. With Shiashi's consent and Conan's insistence, Ran relented. Stay safe, Ran called as she left with her father, who claimed he had urgent business. Happy now? Let's go, Shiashi grumbled, ruffling Conan's hair. Conan nodded obediently, pleased. They set off toward the building across the street. Before they reached it, Conan remembered he'd left something at Rena's and dashed back to fetch it, promising to return quickly. So, traveler, shall we wait for Conan? Charlotte asked Shiashi. Let's go. I doubt that boy will come back. Once he realizes Rena's connected to the Black Organization, his head will be full of leads, and he'll forget us. No point wasting time waiting for someone who won't show, Shiashi replied, and she set off again. 156. Cointro reappears. A short while after Mizunashi Reina and the others had left, she finally stepped out the door. As she closed it, fate played a hand and she stepped on the little transmitter, the eavesdropping device Conan had planted outside, which had fallen from her shoe. Hello. Sorry about earlier. It's been taken care of, she said into her phone. Once she reached the underground garage, Mizunashi Reina dialed Gin to explain. All right, then as planned, let's meet at 10, Jin. On the other end of town, Conan heard the name Jin, carried through the eavesdropper, stuck to the sole of Mizunashi Reina's shoe. Learning that Mizunashi Reina was a member of the Black Organization stunned him. He had never imagined that Miss Mizunashi could be involved, especially after the genuine comfort she had shown the little boy who rang the doorbell. Conan found it hard to reconcile that image with that of a villain who could kill the innocent. At the same time, the coincidence that had just handed him direct clues about the organization thrilled him, and for a moment he forgot the plan he'd had with Shiashi and Charlotte. Conan called Dr. Agasa and asked him to come pick him up. He also rang Shiashi, awkwardly inventing an excuse to say he couldn't return right away, and that the earlier investigation would probably have to be handled by Shiashi and Charlotte alone. Not long after he hung up, Dr. Agasa's familiar car pulled up. Before Conan even opened the door, he saw Haibara in the back seat. He shot the doctor an annoyed look and slid into the passenger seat. Hadn't he just told Agasa not to bring Haibara along? Dr. Agasa caught the look and smiled apologetically. Since she was already there, he couldn't very well make her go back, so Conan resigned himself. Fortunately, perhaps because her perspective had shifted after the incident at the port, Haibara didn't object or try to stop him like she once would. Conan quickly ran through what had happened the previous day and that morning, then leaned back to listen carefully to the sounds from the eavesdropper while tracking the transmitter's position in real time through his glasses. Shortly after 10, the device picked up that Mizunashi Reina had stopped in an indoor parking lot. She rolled down her window and glanced at Jin, who was parked in the next space. Gin's expression showed clear irritation at her lateness. Sorry, Mizanashi Rena, Kier, as she was known in organization circles, explained. I noticed some strange cars tailing me earlier, probably the FBI you mentioned, but I took a detour and shook them off. Is there any problem? Jin asked. No. Kier looked him over. So can you lower the Beretta that was aimed at me from behind the car door? Come on, there are people posted around here watching already. If anything suspicious turned up, you would have been warned. Stop being paranoid. A calm male voice cut through the exchange. Kier flinched as a hand reached out from the back seat of Gin's car and patted him on the shoulder. Gin's face went cold at the gesture, but he kept silent, and after a moment's thought, holstered the gun. Kier widened her eyes. She didn't recognize the voice. He sounded familiar with Jin, maybe an experienced organization agent. Having heard the rumors, she suspected this was the man they called Cointreau. Hello, I'm Cointreau, the man said. A gentle face appeared at the rear window as he introduced himself, confirming her suspicion. Hello. Kier nodded, watching the man she'd only heard about. The reports she'd heard about Cointreau varied, some true, some exaggerated, but most agreed he was highly skilled and cold. She'd expected someone like Jin, hard and severe. Instead, she saw a young man who initially gave off a soft impression, but the illusion dissolved quickly. Though he smiled, there was no warmth in his eyes. Those golden eyes were as cold as ice. Kier silently readied herself. Another car pulled up beside them, and Chianti and Korn greeted her. Then Vermouth's voice floated over from the car with Cointreau. Chianti immediately jumped out, rushing over to argue with Vermouth about Calvado. This time, Calvados hadn't been killed, only punished, so the argument was heated, but not beyond endurance. Chianti, Korn, Jin, Vermouth, Cointreau. Conan listened to the string of code names over the eavesdropper and frowned. So many high-level agents were involved in today's operation. Whoever the target was, they were taking it very seriously. Conan replayed the mission details he'd picked up earlier. Time 13 Orud, location Eddie P., target DJ. Who was DJ? And that voice, Cointreau's, sounded familiar. Conan thought hard, then realization hit him like a shock. It was the same man who had suddenly appeared at the Twilight Mansion and at the port. Cointreau was the man he'd run into. Haibara, have you heard the codename Cointreau? Conan asked urgently. Huh? I've heard it, but I don't have a clear impression, she said, thinking it over. I only know he's a veteran, been in the organization a long time, and that he recently returned to the country. I don't know much more. Why do you ask? You mean the man standing next to Vermouth at the port back then was Cointreau? Haibara blurted. Yeah. Conan hadn't expected such a loud reaction and glanced at her, puzzled. He's too young. Haibara tried to steady herself and voice what felt wrong. From what I know, Cointreau should have been in the organization for at least 10 years. The man we saw looked no older than his early 20s. If he really is Cointreau, then 157 blocked the FBI. He's either in the same situation as Vermouth, or he joined the organization in his teens, Conan said, following up on Haibara's remark. He thought for a moment and added, but since he seems to be an acquaintance of Vermouth, the first option is more likely. Haibara considered it and nodded. If Shinichi's guess is right, then the organization has at least 2 people who don't age. Does that mean they've already mastered the necessary biotechnology? Dr. Agasa looked worried. If the organization really had that technology, it would be terrifying, far harder to deal with. That's unlikely, Haibara said. When I was connected to the organization, if anything like that existed, I would have heard about it. This should just be an accidental case. She paused, then added, like with Edogawa and me. Outside, the rain on the car windows grew heavier, making the signal unstable. The sound in Conan's earpiece began to break up. Earlier, when Cointreau had said organization members were secretly observing nearby suspicious vehicles, Dr. Agasa had parked the car at the roadside. With the bug's signal faltering, Conan used his glasses to triangulate the transmitter roughly. Ignoring Haibara's shouted protests, he opened the car door and stepped out to check it himself. Before he could take 2 steps, he collided with someone. Conan froze when he noticed the shape of a gun muzzle tucked into the person's pocket. His pupils shrank, his body went rigid. He slowly looked up, and then the corner of his mouth twitched. It was Jody. "Hi, cool kid." Jody held an umbrella, took her phone from her pocket, cocked her head, and grinned like someone who'd pulled a prank. Bang! Dr. Agasa and Haibara, still in the car, visibly relaxed. Conan stammered, "Miss Jody, why are you here?" Jody explained that Mizunashii Reina had been contacting Dr. Aride, who was Vermouth in disguise, so she had been assigned to keep an eye on Mizunashii Reina lately. "Oh, so the person monitoring from the apartment across, Shiashi mentioned that, was you." Conan thought it a strange coincidence. Seeing Jody there suggested the surveillance was over, which meant Shiashi might miss her chance if she went to investigate. Jody peered at him. "Cool kid, tell me, what exactly is Shiashi's identity? How is she so skilled?" Hearing Shiashi's name made Jody wince inwardly. She'd been a bit impulsive that morning because Shuichi had praised Shiashi's combat ability and curiosity had gotten the better of her. The morning's events had knocked some sense into her. Around 6:30 a.m., Jody had seen activity at the Target apartment's entrance and had taken up her binoculars as usual. She'd learned that Detective Mori's team, who'd stayed at Mizunashii Reina's place the night before, had helped catch the person who'd been ringing the doorbell every Saturday, a young boy. The matter turned out to be unrelated to the organization. Jody's observations over that period hadn't revealed any suspicious behavior from Mizunashii Reina, so she judged it unlikely Reina was an organization member. She called her supervisor, James, to report and ask whether surveillance should continue. After being ordered to withdraw, Jody began packing up and preparing to erase any trace of her presence. "I didn't expect Miss Jody to be FBI," a voice said nearby, cold and eerie. Shiashi had used Jody's momentary distraction to slip over from the adjacent balcony. From the rough direction of the gaze she had sensed on Mizunashii Reina's house, Shiashi had narrowed down which rooms a watcher might be in and had systematically checked them one by one without alerting anyone. She'd been surprised to find the FBI agent still there and familiar. Jody reacted when she heard the voice. Her heart tightened. She spun to face it and, to her surprise, recognized the newcomer. "Shiashi," she said, bewildered. "Why are you here?" Seeing a familiar face relaxed Jody slightly, but she kept a cautious stance. Even if it seemed unlikely Shiashi was connected to the Black organization, nothing could be ruled out completely. With someone as capable as Shiashi, however, ordinary organization operatives would probably be outmatched. Letting her guard relax, Jody couldn't help thinking how things might play out if Shiashi ever crossed paths with the organization directly. But she kept her expression neutral and calmly asked why Shiashi had appeared. Shiashi explained briefly. She and a companion had split up to investigate. She'd been checking rooms one by one from the other side, and she'd come over to reconsolidate. As she spoke, Jody heard a soft shift of movement on the balcony. Shiashi had come from, someone making themselves light and deliberate. Shiashi called out, "Charlotte." The name was meant to indicate Charlotte's position and to reassure her there was no danger. Footsteps grew slightly louder, and a girl with pink hair and red clothing appeared, having flipped over from the adjacent balcony. Shiashi introduced the two of them, then looked at Jody expectantly, waiting for an explanation. Under Shiashi's probing gaze, Jody felt exposed. Anything to do with the Black organization couldn't be shared with unrelated people. She organized her thoughts and spoke carefully. They had suspected Mizunashii Reina might have links to an underworld power, so she had monitored the place as a precaution. Now the suspicion seemed unfounded, and she was ready to withdraw. As for why an FBI agent was in Japan, she claimed she was on vacation and had stumbled across the matter, helping out informally. It wasn't anything official or particularly important, Shiashi said. Shiashi and Charlotte exchanged looks and nodded, accepting the explanation. Jody was left unsure whether they truly believed her or how much they believed. "By the way, Shiashi, I heard from Conan that you're really good in a fight. Would you mind sparring with me?" The request came out of nowhere. Jody knew it sounded abrupt, but she was genuinely curious about the girl's skill, so she forced herself to ask. "Sure." Shiashi blinked, but didn't overthink it. It wasn't a big deal, so she agreed immediately. "Then I'll referee." Charlotte shot his hand up the moment he heard Shiashi accept, volunteering with obvious excitement. They didn't bother finding another place. The pair squared off in the near-empty, spacious living room. Despite taking Shuichi Akai's assessment of Shiashi seriously, Jodi's first instinct was to hold back when she saw Shiashi's slender, delicate frame. The instant they exchanged blows and the force slammed into Jodi's arm, she knew she'd underestimated her. Shuichi had been right. With no alternative, Jodi took it seriously, treating Shiashi as a real opponent and going all out. Conan's mouth twitched as he listened to Jodi recount what had just happened. If he hadn't left halfway through, he would have run straight into Jodi and Shiashi together. He hadn't expected them to meet, let alone for Jodi to challenge her, and he was dying to know how long Shiashi had lasted against an FBI agent. So, Teacher Jodi, how long did you last? Conan thought he'd spoken his thoughts aloud at first, then realized the voice was Haibara's. He glanced at her, surprised she cared about something like this. Hey, don't tell me you all just assume I'd lose, Jodi protested, hands on her hips. Seeing the same doubtful looks on Haibara's, Dr. Agasa's, and Conan's faces made her more aggrieved. Fine, I admit it, I lost. Lasted about 3 minutes. She brooded a moment before confessing, conveniently leaving out that Shiashi had clearly gone easy on her. Then I said goodbye and left. On my way out, I saw you running off in a panic, so I decided to follow that woman. When she started taking detours, I gave up and broke off. So the strange car Mizunashi Reina had mentioned over the bug really had been the FBI. Putting the pieces together, Jodi learned Conan had accidentally planted both a bug and a tracker on Mizunashi Reina, and that the organization would move at 1 p.m. She stopped trying to push Conan away, jumped into Dr. Agasa's car, radioed her colleagues, and teamed up with the boy detectives. En route, Conan deduced that the target codenamed DJ was Kuki Domon, a candidate in the upcoming House of Representatives election. The organization had singled him out because his outspoken, high-profile stance against violence and crime had won him massive support. If elected, a near certainty, he would become a significant obstacle to their underground activities. The rain began to ease, but they still didn't know where Eddie P. was. With barely half an hour until 13, if they couldn't figure that out, they wouldn't arrive in time. It was Haibara's casual remark that sparked Conan's inspiration. Hunting ground, remembering that Vermouth had used the same word, he realized Eddie P. meant Baca Park. The moment he made the connection, he ordered Dr. Agasa to floor it toward Baca Park. At Baca Park, Chianti and Korn were already in position, crosshairs trained on the spot where Kier would lead Kuki Domon. Jin, has Kier shown up yet? Chianti radioed from her perch, impatience creeping into her voice. Wait, Kier is bringing DJ over now. Jin's tone was calm but strict, a warning for Chianti and Korn to stick to the plan and do nothing reckless. As they waited in silence, another car rolled into the parking garage. Normally cars came and went, so Jin, Vodka, and Cointreau barely glanced at it. Only Vermouth, idly looking around, noticed a familiar, utterly out-of-place figure stepping out of the car. That boy. And the FBI, why? Vermouth's eyes widened, and she let out a soft, resigned sigh. Beside her, Cointreau caught the sudden shift in her mood and turned to her questioningly. He didn't need to ask. Through Vermouth's window, he spotted a vaguely familiar vehicle, the kind he'd only read about, Dr. Agasa's car, the one belonging to Shinichi Kudo's former neighbor. That car being here was no coincidence. Vermouth's reaction made the answer clear. Conan Edogawa was present. What was supposed to be mere FBI interference had now drawn in the protagonist himself, and the woman with him would likely complicate matters further. The chances of success were dropping fast, but Cointreau felt no real disappointment. After his sister's message yesterday, he had expected this. He'd come today only to test the waters. Failure would cost him nothing. Seeing Kier leading Koki Domon into her camera's sights, Chianti was getting impatient. What's taking so long, Kier? Jin, watching the scene through the hidden camera in Kier's brooch, barked the instruction over the communicator. Good, Kier. Lead Domon to the designated spot. Good, exactly like that. Korn, usually expressionless, allowed a small, satisfied smile as everything went according to plan. Cointreau, sitting behind Jin, leaned forward to watch the surveillance feed with mild curiosity. It was strange, no unexpected complications yet. He suspected the mission wouldn't stay that smooth for long. Pedestrians began to recognize Koki Domon and clustered around him, creating obstacles for Korn and Chianti's line of fire. "I've got him. Can I shoot?" Korn asked, still steady on target despite the crowd. Jin stopped him. "Hold. There are too many bystanders. Wait until he sits on the bench." "Maybe we should just go for it. There aren't that many people, and with Chianti and Korn, they shouldn't miss." Cointreau, reclining against the car seat with his arms folded, offered the suggestion casually. "It's my intuition, not proof. You're the one in charge." Jin thought it over but stuck to the original plan. It was the safest way to minimize complications. He urged Kir through the communicator. "Kir, hurry. Get him to sit on the bench." Kir approached Domon and began steering him toward the bench for the staged interview. Jin watched with a smile as Domon neared the edge of the bench, and then more umbrellas popped open. Bystanders had shielded him with their umbrellas, effectively blocking any clean shot. Cointreau instinctively stuck his hand out the car window to check for rain. At first he felt nothing, but after a few seconds, small droplets began to land on his palm. It was raining. A flash of realization crossed his face. The rain around Domon had not been entirely natural. Someone had staged it earlier. The sudden real rainfall masked the artificial anomaly, and it had likely saved their plan. If Jin had noticed the weird localized rain, he might have been suspicious. As it was, the real rain covered it up. The heavens were favoring the protagonist, again. Cointreau mentally noted that if he wanted to oppose Conan Edogawa in the future, he would have to be far more meticulous. With umbrellas up and the crowd closing in, a clean shot was impossible. The assassination had failed. They would have to move to Plan B. Jin, too impatient to keep watching the now useless feed, shut off the monitor. What he didn't see, because he cut the feed a fraction too early, was a small detail in the surveillance: a boy picking up a shoe Kir had dropped. If Jin had seen that, he might have traced the boy's connection to Kogoro Muri and suspected that Muri had discovered something and was tailing Kir. But the screen went dark before that clue appeared. Meanwhile, Kir had noticed she was being followed, and sensing something was wrong, Conan hadn't had time to retrieve the transmitter and listening device that had been stuck to the sole of Kir's shoe. That oversight turned out to be crucial. From the eavesdropping device, Conan and Jody were able to hear the Black Organization's plans for a follow-up assassination. They quickly arranged personnel to intervene and even planned to try to capture one or two organization members to get more information. To protect Kogoro Muri and Ran, Jody had ordered Dr. Agasa and Haibara to take Ran and the others to the doctor's place in advance. She also arranged for 2 or 3 FBI agents to guard them. The counter-operation went smoothly. They managed to corner and incapacitate an organization member. The surprise was that the captured person wasn't Vermouth, it was Kir. Even more problematic, Gin found the transmitter and listening device under the shoes Kir had changed out of. As he'd expected, this made him suspicious of Kogoro Muri. He notified the boss and readied a new plan. Change the target. Change targets? Who's next? Vermouth asked, peeling off her disguise on the motorcycle and lifting her helmet with one hand. The next target, Baika Town, 5 Kome, Muri Detective Agency, Kogoro Muri. Gin's mouth curled slightly as he spoke the new target in a low voice. Cointreau, in the back seat, raised an eyebrow and watched Vermouth with keen interest. He was curious to see how she would react. Vermouth had probably spotted Conan in Hydo Park and should have expected some complications from that child, but Cointreau still anticipated a dramatic response now that Jin had locked on to Kogoro Muri. He wondered whether Jin would ever realize Conan's true significance. Vodka pulled up, and Vermouth climbed into the car. She caught Cointreau's barely concealed triumphant look and shot him a cold glare. She cast a quick look at Jin in the front seat and swallowed the sarcastic retort she'd been about to make. Humph. Her man might be in danger, and Cointreau was sitting there smirking instead of helping. She would wait and see how that smugness held up when the princess he so enjoyed watching ran into real trouble. The car pulled away toward Baika Town. 160. Troublemakers. Cointreau had no idea what Vermouth was thinking, and even if he had, he wouldn't have cared. His little sister was far more obedient than the child Vermouth favored. She would never meddle in something this dangerous, And even if something unexpected happened, Cointreau was sure it wouldn't touch her. She could handle her own mess. He wasn't being objective. He saw the woman who'd built her own organization and cooperated with the black organization through rose-colored glasses. Out of sight, out of mind. Vermouth turned her gaze to Jin and tried to figure out why he'd suddenly switched targets. If she could learn the reason, she might be able to talk him out of killing. In the FBI car across town, Conan had traced the route of Gin's Porsche 356A and deduced that Gin's team had found the transmitter and eavesdropping device and were heading for the Muri Detective Agency. Worse, Dr. Agasa reported that Kogoro Muri hadn't stayed at the doctor's house. He'd left before Jody's FBI backup arrived and rushed back to the agency to listen to the horse races. Conan and the others floored it toward Baeka while Conan frantically dialed the agency's landline. Kogoro had yanked the cord out to use headphones. No matter how loud Conan shouted, Kogoro couldn't hear him. On a rooftop not far from the agency, Chianti and Korn watched Kogoro through their rifle scopes and spotted the earphones. Vodka was convinced the eavesdropping device had been planted by Kogoro, proof the man hadn't given up and was still checking for audio. Jin didn't contradict him. He produced the eavesdropping device, wrapped in paper, and leveled a final ultimatum at the Kogoro he believed was on the other end. The transmitter and eavesdropping device in my hand look exactly like the ones we took off that woman. 10 seconds. If you want to tell me your connection to our traitor Sherry, take your left hand off the headphone and raise it. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. Smack! Just as Jin reached 1. And Chianti and Korn's fingers tightened on their triggers. A soccer ball crashed into the agency's window. Jin and the rooftop shooters froze. Even Chianti lifted her head from her scope. Cointreau's eyes widened at the sudden turn. He glanced down. The kick had come from that kid, Conan. Kogoro jumped, yanked the window open, and started cursing at Conan standing on the sidewalk. Conan seized the opening to shout that Kogoro's headphones were only for the race results. Vermouth saw her chance. Jin's justification had been airtight, so she hadn't been able to stop him openly, until now. Casually, she said, "Looks like he's not involved this time." "Not necessarily," Cointreau muttered. "Too many coincidences. And don't forget Kier is missing and the FBI are meddling. This Detective Muri could be in league with them." Vermouth sounded unnerved, and letting concern cloud her judgment was exactly what Cointreau had expected. A couple of sentences from a child and a protest from the target couldn't shake the suspicion or derail Gin's plan. Besides, the boy was reckless, sticking his nose into the organization's business. If you're going to interfere, at least plan it properly. Don't leave a trail straight to your doorstep. They'd already tracked the signal back to the nest. Cointreau still didn't know that the transmitter and bug on Kier hadn't been planted by Conan at all. Kier had accidentally attached them to herself and couldn't remove them. Even if he had known, it probably wouldn't have changed his mind. He'd only have marveled again at how neatly everything fell into the hero's lap. He had a certain faith in that luck, so his earlier words hadn't been meant necessarily to kill Kogoro. He only wanted Jin to hurry and deliver at least a lesson. This many organization members mobilized and accomplishing nothing, then losing a codenamed agent on top of it, what a joke. Clearly, Jin felt the same. Without hesitation, he ordered Chianti and Korn, "Take the shot, deal with the brat downstairs as well." At the command, Chianti flashed an excited grin and swung her muzzle into position. "Wait," Vermouth's voice cut in immediately. Hearing Jin's order, she shoved aside her irritation at Cointreau for suddenly targeting Kogoro against their earlier agreement and scrambled for a reason to stop him. "We have no proof. If we kill him now, and he's on good terms with the police..." She didn't finish. Gin clicked the safety off his Beretta and leveled it at her, impatience and displeasure clear in his eyes. "Vermouth, you talk too much." His gaze bored into her, unreadable. "You and that detective, something going on?" Vermouth looked back, a smile curving her lips. "And if there is..." "Ahem, not trying to butt into your chat, but we're wasting time," Cointreau interjected. "Since the detective might not be the one who planted the bug, decide quickly, Jin. Drag it out much longer, and the FBI will jump in to mess things up again." Cointreau rolled his eyes inwardly. He'd known it wouldn't be easy. the shot wouldn't go cleanly. Now Vermouth herself was stepping in to block it. He couldn't fathom why Chianti was so obedient to Vermouth these days. She used to bristle at her. Vermouth said, "Wait," and Chianti actually held fire. Cointreau wondered who would pop up next if Jin gave the order to shoot again. Maybe the FBI would actually show up.